History is often written by the victors, but its most dangerous secrets are written by engineers. Somewhere between the ruins of the Third Reich and the dawn of the Cold War, a strange aircraft briefly existed that looked like it belonged to the future, not the 1940s. No fuselage, no tail, no propellers, just a smooth, ominous flying wing cutting through the air like a shadow. Historians such as David Myra, R.V. Jones, and aerospace researchers at Northrop Grumman have all echoed the same unsettling thought. Germany was far closer to stealth aviation than anyone expected. Even Allied intelligence officers who examined the wreckage in 1945 admitted shock at how advanced the design truly was. Former Luftwaffe engineers who survived the war described it as an aircraft ahead of its time built in the wrong era. American test engineers later called it conceptually dangerous, not because it flew, but because of what it hinted at. My name is Knightley. I study war history not because I admire destruction, but because I believe the machines of war reveal the ambitions, fears, and obsessions of the people who built them. I walk through museums, archives, and forgotten airfields looking for answers others stopped asking. What happens when a weapon doesn't lose the war, but still loses its country? What happens when revolutionary technology is born too late? And most importantly, what happens after the guns fall silent? Tonight, we follow the trail of one of the strangest aircraft ever built, the Horten Ho 229, the flying wing that would quietly shape stealth technology decades later. This is not just the story of a plane, it is the story of what happens to dangerous ideas when war ends. The rise and legacy of the Horten Ho 229, the flying wing that inspired stealth technology. The birth of a dangerous idea. Before we can understand what happened to the Horten Ho 229 after World War II, we must confront why it existed at all. No weapon this radical appears by accident. By the early 1940s, Nazi Germany was trapped in a war it could no longer control. Allied industrial output dwarfed the Reich's capacity. German cities burned nightly under bomber streams. The Luftwaffe, once the sharpest blade in Europe, was bleeding pilots faster than it could train replacements. Conventional aircraft design had reached its limits. Germany did not need better planes. It needed different thinking. That thinking came from two brothers, Walter and Reimar Horten. The Hortens were not typical military engineers. They were aviation idealists, almost heretical in their rejection of traditional aircraft design. Since the 1930s, they believed the future of flight lay in one radical principle, the flying wing: no fuselage, no tail, no unnecessary surfaces. Just lift, speed, and efficiency. To the Horten brothers, every vertical stabilizer, every protruding cockpit, every structural joint was wasted energy. A pure wing would fly farther, faster, and quieter. Long before radar stealth was formally understood, they were already minimizing what modern engineers would call radar cross-section. At first, the Luftwaffe dismissed them as dreamers. Then the war began going badly. The strategic environment that made the Ho 229 possible. By 1943, Germany's situation was desperate. Allied bombers struck deep into the Reich daily. American B-17s and B-24s flew in daylight. British Lancasters ruled the night. German interceptors lacked speed, altitude, and most critically endurance. Fuel shortages worsened everything. The German Air Ministry responded with an impossible demand known as the 3x1000 requirement: 1,000 kilometers per hour, 1,000 kilometers of range, 1,000 kilograms of bombs. Most designers quietly ignored it. It violated known aerodynamic and engineering limits. The Hortens did not. Their solution was brutal in its simplicity. Reduce drag to the absolute minimum, eliminate everything that didn't generate lift, build light even if it meant using wood. Thus the Ho 229 was born. It was not designed as a dogfighter. It was designed as a high-speed bomber-interceptor hybrid, a machine meant to punch through Allied formations, deliver its payload and vanish before escorts could react. In theory, it was untouchable. Engineering strengths. Why the Ho 229 was so revolutionary. The Ho 229's design reads like something from the Cold War, yet it was drafted in the final years of World War II. Aerodynamics. The flying wing reduced drag dramatically. Wind tunnel tests showed the Ho 229 could outperform conventional aircraft with similar engines. Speed, powered by two Junkers Jumo 004 turbojets, the same engines used in the Me-262, projected top speed exceeded 970 km/h, approaching the sound barrier of the era. Material choices. Due to aluminum shortages, much of the aircraft was constructed from wood and plywood, bonded with charcoal-infused adhesives. Decades later, researchers would discover these materials absorbed radar energy, an accidental stealth benefit. Profile. From the front, the Ho 229 was nearly invisible. No vertical tail, no bulky fuselage, just a smooth, curved wing slicing through air. This wasn't stealth as we understand it today, but it was a precursor, an unintended one. Modern tests conducted by Northrop Grumman in the 2000s confirmed what Allied engineers suspected in 1945. The Ho 229 had a significantly reduced radar signature compared to conventional WW-2 aircraft. Engineering weaknesses. Why it was still a prototype. For all its brilliance, the Ho 229 was not perfect. In fact, it was dangerous. Stability issues. Flying wings are inherently unstable, especially at low speeds. Without modern fly-by-wire systems, pilots relied on mechanical controls that left little margin for error. Engine reliability. The Jumo 004 engines were notoriously fragile. Flameouts, compressor failures, and short service life plagued all German jet aircraft. Production problems. Germany in 1944 was in no position to mass-produce experimental aircraft. Factories were bombed, skilled workers were dead or conscripted, fuel shortages limited testing. The Ho 229 demanded time Germany no longer had. First flights and test reactions. The first Ho 229 prototype V1 flew as a glider. It proved the aerodynamic concept worked. The second prototype, V2, was jet-powered. Test pilots described it as extremely fast, smooth at high speed, unforgiving at low speed. During one test flight in February 1945, engine failure caused a crash that killed test pilot Erwin Ziller. That crash ended any realistic hope of operational deployment. But the damage to Allied confidence had already been done. Psychological impact. Fear without combat. Here is what makes the Ho 229 unique. It became feared without ever fighting. Allied intelligence reports described it as a radical flying wing jet, potentially unstoppable if deployed, indicative of advanced German research. Rumors spread faster than facts. Pilots whispered about invisible German jets. Engineers worried about design concepts they hadn't considered yet. The Ho 229 represented something more dangerous than a weapon. It represented lost control over the future. Why the Ho 229 became iconic? The Ho 229 achieved legendary status not through victories, but through implication. It symbolized how close Germany came to changing air warfare, how innovation can outrun ethics, how technology does not need time to kill it, only needs potential. Unlike tanks or rifles, it wasn't judged by body count. It was judged by what it could have become. The war slips away. By March 1945, the Third Reich was collapsing. Fuel reserves were gone. Factories were overrun. Command structures disintegrated. The Ho 229 V3 airframe sat unfinished at a Gotha factory, engines missing, weapons uninstalled, wings incomplete. There would be no squadrons, no missions, no last-minute miracle. And then, suddenly, it was over. Germany surrendered. The skies fell silent. But the Ho 229, unfinished, untested, misunderstood, did not disappear. It waited. Because the end of World War II was not the end of competition. It was only the beginning of a new war, fought not with bombs but with ideas. And the flying wing had just entered the world stage. The war ends. The fate of the Horten Ho 229 begins a war that did not end cleanly. When Germany surrendered in May 1945, the world did not suddenly become peaceful. The guns fell silent, but chaos remained. Across Europe, airfields were littered with burned-out aircraft, half-assembled prototypes, crates of spare parts, and sealed hangars whose contents were unknown even to the men guarding them. The Luftwaffe collapsed overnight, but its machines did not vanish. They were abandoned where they stood on factory floors, in forests inside underground tunnels, and at makeshift test sites scattered across the collapsing Reich. The Horten Ho 229 was among those forgotten weapons. Unlike frontline fighters or bombers, it was not deployed to operational airfields. It existed in fragments, prototypes, unfinished airframes, test components spread across central Germany. There was no dramatic last stand, no attempt to fly them to safety, no mass destruction order executed in time. The Ho 229 simply ran out of war, and that made it vulnerable. Where the Ho 229 stood when the war ended. By April 1945, the Ho 229 program was effectively dead. The V-1 glider had already served its purpose and no longer existed in flyable form. The V-2 jet-powered prototype had been destroyed earlier that year in a fatal crash. The V-3, intended to be the first armed pre-production aircraft, sat incomplete at a Gotha factory near Friedrichroda. Its wings were assembled, its structure was recognizable, but it had never flown. Around it lay blueprints, tooling, and partial documentation scattered, incomplete and vulnerable to capture. This mattered, because in 1945, the victors were no longer just conquering territory. They were hunting knowledge. Allied discovery, recognition without understanding. When American forces advanced into Thuringia, they encountered something they did not expect. Inside German facilities, they found aircraft designs that did not match anything in Allied inventories. Among them was a sleek, wing-shaped structure that defied conventional classification. Reports from U.S. Army Air Force's intelligence officers described the Ho 229 as a jet-propelled flying wing, radically different from known German aircraft. Possibly experimental bomber or interceptor. At first, there was confusion. Was it a bomber, a fighter, a reconnaissance platform? The answer was unclear even to the Germans who had worked on it. But one thing was obvious. This was not scrap. The first critical decision, destroy or preserve official Allied policy, demanded the destruction of German military equipment to prevent future rearmament. Unofficially, that policy was ignored, selectively. The Ho 229 triggered an internal debate. It had never fought. It posed no immediate threat, but it represented ideas the Allies had not yet mastered. Destroying it would be easy. Preserving it could be invaluable. The decision was made quietly. The Ho 229 V3 would be seized, catalogued, and shipped. No press, no photographs released, no public announcement. The aircraft was disassembled and crated like contraband. The technology vacuum and the beginning of the race. The end of World War II did not end rivalry. It transformed it. The United States and the Soviet Union were already positioning themselves for the next confrontation. Each understood that the weapons of the future would not be defined by quantity, but by technological superiority. German experimental programs became prizes, jet engines, ballistic missiles, guided weapons, flying wings. The Ho 229 was part of this hidden harvest. While Soviet teams seized factories and engineers in the east, American teams pushed aggressively into central Germany to secure anything unusual. Time mattered. Whoever studied these machines first would shape the post-war battlefield. Operation Paperclip and the Shadow Network. Although the Horten brothers themselves did not become central figures in Operation Paperclip, their ideas did. American intelligence gathered. Design drawings, test reports, wind tunnel data, construction techniques. These materials were not sent to universities. They were sent to restricted research facilities. Engineers were instructed to analyze, not replicate. The goal was not to build a Ho 229. The goal was to understand why it worked. Disassembly, learning by taking it apart. Once in Allied hands, the Ho 229 V3 was stripped down systematically. Every section of the wing was examined, every joint was measured, every material was tested. Particular attention was paid to wing sweep angles, control surface placement, structural strength without a fuselage, unexpected absorption of radar energy. At the time, radar stealth was still poorly understood, but analysts noticed something unsettling. The aircraft's shape and materials did not reflect radar waves the way metal-bodied aircraft did. This discovery would not become public for decades. The silence around the Ho-229. Unlike the V-2 rocket or the Me-262, the Ho-229 did not become a propaganda trophy. There were no victory parades, no public test flights, no immediate copies built. It vanished into archives. This silence was deliberate, because acknowledging it raised uncomfortable questions. How close had Germany come to a technological leap? What other ideas had been lost or stolen? And what did this mean for the next war? The Ho-229 was quietly reclassified from enemy weapon to research artifact. The Cold War shadow begins to form. By late 1945, the world had shifted. Allies became rivals. Cooperation became suspicion. Information became currency. The Ho-229 now belonged to a future that no longer spoke the language of World War II. It would influence flying wing research in the United States, stability studies for tailless aircraft, early thinking about radar evasion. But it would never again wear German markings. The war that created it was over. The war that would learn from it had just begun. Transition forward. The Ho-229 had survived surrender, destruction orders, and political chaos. But survival did not mean freedom. Its fate would now follow the path taken by countless other experimental weapons. Some would be scrapped, some studied, some forgotten, some locked away. The question was no longer what was it built to do. The question had become, where did it all go? When wars end, weapons do not vanish. They scatter. They are dismantled, stolen, studied, forgotten, buried, and sometimes deliberately erased. The story of the Horten Ho 229 after 1945 is not a single straight line. It is a web of diverging paths shaped by politics, fear, secrecy, and necessity. There was no ceremonial ending for the Ho 229, no final flight, no official destruction order signed in public. Instead, its legacy fractured, scrapped for survival, when history became raw material. In 1945, Europe was starving for resources. Railways had been bombed, bridges destroyed, cities lay in ruins. Steel, aluminum, copper. Everything was scarce. The moral calculus of the post-war world was simple: survival first, history later. Experimental aircraft were especially vulnerable. Unlike frontline machines, prototypes lacked documentation, spare parts, and operational value. Many German experimental airframes, especially those incomplete or damaged, were immediately designated for scrapping. While only a handful of Ho-229 airframes ever existed, most associated components met an unceremonious end. Test sections of wings, wooden molds and jigs, spare control surfaces, structural frames. These were cut apart and recycled. Wooden components were burned or repurposed. Metal fittings were melted down. Jet engine parts were cannibalized for other projects or destroyed. It is entirely possible, likely, even that fragments of the Ho-229 were transformed into railway components, industrial tools, civilian construction materials. History dissolved into rebuilding. No records tracked this process. Once scrapped, the Ho-229 ceased to exist in any official sense. Captured by the United States, preservation through obsession. One Ho-229 did not share that fate. The V-3 airframe, captured intact by American forces, became the most important surviving piece of the program. Shipped to the United States alongside other German experimental aircraft, it was catalogued, studied, and quietly stored. Unlike the Me-262, it was never flown by American pilots. Unlike the V-2, it was never tested publicly. Instead, it became a specimen. American engineers were not interested in turning it into a weapon. They wanted answers. Why did the flying wing generate such low drag? How did it maintain control without a tail? What were the limits of pilot workload? Most importantly, though few admitted it at the time, what did its shape mean for detection? Decades later, the Ho-229 would resurface in a surprising place, the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, where it remains today, incomplete but preserved. It is the only largely intact Ho-229 known to exist. The Soviet path. Knowledge without evidence. The Soviet Union did not acquire a complete Ho-229 airframe, but it did not need one. Soviet intelligence teams captured German flying wing research, documentation, and critically engineers familiar with tailless aircraft. The USSR had already shown interest in unconventional aircraft design and quickly incorporated lessons learned into post-war experimental programs. The influence was indirect but visible. Soviet designers explored swept-wing jets, tailless aircraft concepts, high-speed bomber profiles. No Soviet aircraft was a direct copy of the Ho-229, but its philosophy reduced drag, simplify structure, maximize speed fit perfectly into early Cold War doctrine. The Ho-229 became part of a silent, undocumented knowledge transfer. Britain and France, analysis without adoption. British and French forces examined captured German technology extensively. In the case of the Ho-229, they focused less on replication and more on evaluation. British aeronautical researchers were skeptical of flying wings. They valued stability, pilot survivability, and reliability over raw speed. To them, the Ho-229 was impressive but impractical with 1940s control systems. France, rebuilding its aerospace industry from ruins, lacked the resources to pursue radical designs immediately. French engineers absorbed German data, but prioritized conventional aircraft that could be produced quickly. For both nations, the Ho-229 became a lesson rather than a roadmap. Secret programs, where paper trails end. Not all Ho-229-related material followed transparent paths. Some documentation vanished. Some test results were reclassified. Some design notes never resurfaced. Post-war intelligence agencies deliberately fragmented German research to prevent any single rival from gaining a complete picture. Files were split, copied, renamed and buried inside larger programs. In this environment, the Ho-229 lost its identity. Its ideas survived, but not under its name. Flying wing concepts quietly reappeared inside. American strategic bomber research, radar cross-section studies, high-altitude reconnaissance projects. By the time stealth aircraft emerged decades later, the Ho-229 was no longer sighted. It had become background noise in the evolution of aviation. Museums, preservation by accident and persistence. Only one major physical survivor escaped the scrapyard. The Ho-229 V3 spent years in storage unrestored, incomplete, and largely ignored. It did not fit the heroic narrative of Allied victory. It represented uncomfortable questions about how close Germany had come to future warfare. Eventually, it found a home in a museum. Restoration proved difficult. Missing engines, no complete flight documentation. Fragile wooden construction curators made a deliberate choice: preserve rather than rebuild. The aircraft remains unfinished, frozen in time as it was found. Battlefield ghosts and lost fragments. Unlike tanks or ships, aircraft rarely leave large wrecks behind. But fragments endure. Some Ho-229 components may still exist. In private collections, in mislabeled storage crates, embedded in soil near test sites. There are no confirmed underwater wrecks or crash sites linked to operational Ho-229s, but rumors persist of wing sections buried to avoid capture, of documents hidden before surrender. No evidence has surfaced, only speculation. Why so little survived? The scarcity of surviving Ho-229 artifacts is not mysterious. It is logical. The aircraft never reached mass production, existed in small numbers, was built during a collapsing war economy. Most weapons vanish when they fail to reach maturity. The Ho-229 did not survive because it was insignificant. It vanished because it arrived too late. A fragmented ending. The story of where they all went is not clean. Some were melted, some were studied, some were forgotten. One was preserved. No single ending exists. Like the war that created it, the Ho-229 splintered into many paths, each shaping the future in a different way. And somewhere inside modern stealth aircraft, its shadow still flies uncredited, unseen, and unresolved. Impact on the post-war world. When the Horten Ho 229 vanished from the skies of a defeated Germany, it did not vanish from history. It simply changed form. The aircraft never fired a shot in combat, never bombed a city, never altered the outcome of World War II. Yet its true impact unfolded after the war, quietly, indirectly, and over decades. The Ho 229 became one of those rare machines whose influence was not measured in destruction but in ideas. And ideas, once released, do not surrender. Influence on post-war military technology. The most immediate legacy of the Ho 229 was not imitation but validation. Before 1945, flying wings were viewed by most military planners as unstable curiosities. After 1945, they became serious research subjects, not because the Ho 229 was flawless, but because it proved something radical. A tailless jet aircraft could fly fast, efficiently, and controllably, at least at high speed. In the United States, captured German research fed into a broader reassessment of aircraft design. American engineers had already experimented with flying wings before the war, most notably through Jack Northrop's YB-35 and YB-49 programs. But the Ho 229 reinforced a critical realization. The Germans had arrived at similar conclusions independently. That mattered. It confirmed that the flying wing was not a dead-end theory. It was a convergent solution to the same aerodynamic problems faced by every major power. Cold War bomber design soon reflected this shift. Aircraft grew wider, smoother, more integrated, less cluttered with protruding surfaces. While no immediate copies of the Ho 229 were built, its core principles, drag reduction, blended structures, and minimal profiles, became standard goals in high-performance aircraft. Decades later, when stealth aircraft emerged, engineers would rediscover these same ideas under new names. The unintended birth of stealth thinking. Perhaps the Ho 229's most famous legacy is also the most misunderstood. The aircraft was not designed to be stealthy in the modern sense. The Germans were not building radar-evading aircraft as a formal doctrine. Radar existed, but stealth theory did not. And yet the Ho 229 accidentally embodied many stealth principles. Smooth, continuous surfaces, absence of vertical stabilizers, reduced frontal cross-section, non-metallic construction materials. Post-war testing conducted decades later, most notably by engineers affiliated with Northrop, demonstrated that the Ho 229 had a significantly reduced radar signature compared to conventional W-2 aircraft. This discovery reframed the aircraft's place in history. The Ho 229 did not invent stealth, but it anticipated it. For Cold War planners, this was unsettling. It suggested that revolutionary concepts could emerge accidentally, not just through formal doctrine. It also implied that future adversaries might stumble upon dangerous ideas without fully understanding them. Stealth, once seen as a futuristic dream, became a strategic necessity. Shaping Cold War doctrine without being seen. The influence of the Ho 229 was never explicit. You will not find it named in NATO doctrine manuals or Warsaw Pact blueprints. It did not appear in public training films or propaganda posters. Its impact was subtler. Military aviation doctrine after World War II increasingly emphasized high-speed penetration rather than dogfighting, survivability through evasion rather than armor, aircraft that avoided detection rather than challenged it. These shifts aligned perfectly with what the Ho 229 had implied years earlier. In the nuclear age, bombers no longer needed to fight their way through defenses. They needed to avoid them. The Ho 229 silhouette low blended indistinct matched this new philosophy far better than traditional aircraft shapes. Even though it was never sighted, it fit the future too well to be ignored. Psychological impact, a weapon that haunted engineers. Veterans rarely spoke about the Ho 229. Engineers did. For many Allied designers, the aircraft became a symbol of something deeply uncomfortable. Germany had been closer to future aviation than expected. This realization challenged post-war narratives. The Allies had won decisively, but victory did not mean technological supremacy in every field. The Ho 229 suggested that innovation was not the monopoly of winners. In aerospace circles, the aircraft gained a near-mythical status, a machine that arrived too late, a design without a war, a warning disguised as a prototype. It represented missed futures and alternate paths, what aviation might have become sooner under different circumstances. Cultural impact, from secret relic to icon. For decades, the Ho 229 was almost unknown outside specialist circles. Then, slowly, it resurfaced. Books, documentaries, and museum exhibits began referencing it as the stealth fighter before stealth, the Nazi flying wing, the aircraft ahead of its time. In popular culture, it became a symbol of forbidden technology, advanced, unsettling, and morally ambiguous. Video games and speculative fiction embraced its shape as shorthand for secret weapons and lost knowledge. Its presence in the Smithsonian transformed it from classified artifact to public curiosity. Visitors stared at it, not because it was beautiful, but because it looked wrong for its era. Too modern, too smooth, too quiet. Political meaning in the post-war world. Politically, the Ho 229 occupied an awkward space. For Germany, it was a reminder of what had been lost and what could not be reclaimed. The post-war nation distanced itself from the technological ambitions of the Third Reich, focusing instead on reconstruction and restraint. For the victors, the aircraft was both trophy and warning. It reinforced the idea that defeating an enemy did not mean erasing their ideas. Those ideas could migrate, adapt, and resurface elsewhere. In this sense, the Ho 229 became a Cold War artifact long before the Cold War fully began, a symbol of how quickly yesterday's enemy could become tomorrow's teacher. A legacy that refused to die. The Ho 229 did not reshape the post-war world overnight. It did something slower and more dangerous. It planted questions. What if shape mattered more than speed? What if invisibility mattered more than firepower? What if the future of air combat was decided before anyone fired a shot? Those questions would echo through decades of research, culminating in aircraft that finally realized the promise the Ho 229 only hinted at. The war had ended. But the ideas born in its final moments would fly on, long after the engines of the Horten Ho 229 had fallen silent. The final survivors. By the late 1940s, the Horten Ho 229 had mostly vanished. Yet despite scrapping, secrecy, and decades of obscurity, fragments of its story and its physical form endured. The few survivors that remain today are invaluable, not for their ability to fly, but for the insight they provide into a moment when aviation history could have taken a very different turn. Catalogue of remaining units. To understand the rarity of the Ho 229 today, consider the numbers. V1 glider. The earliest prototype, constructed primarily of wood, was destroyed during testing or dismantled for parts. No pieces are known to survive. V2 jet prototype. This aircraft crashed during a test flight, claiming the life of pilot Erwin Ziller. Some fragments may exist in obscure archives, but nothing flyable remains. V3 pre-production. Jet. The most complete example ever built, captured by U.S. forces at the end of the war, was eventually shipped to the United States. Today, it resides at the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, incomplete and unrestored, a silent witness to a war that ended before it could truly begin. Beyond these primary airframes, a handful of control surfaces, fuselage fragments, and molds survive in private collections or in museum storage facilities. They are often mislabeled or tucked away, their significance recognized only by historians or aircraft restoration specialists. The scarcity of surviving units reflects the aircraft's history, a prototype, experimental, and caught in a collapsing wartime industry. Each remaining fragment is therefore priceless, representing not just a machine, but a conceptual leap in aviation design. The value of survivors today. The surviving Ho 229 V3 is more than a static exhibit. It is a repository of knowledge. Researchers use it to study aerodynamic innovation. The flying wing design offers lessons in efficiency, lift distribution, and stability without a traditional tail. Materials engineering. The use of wood, adhesives, and charcoal-infused laminates provides insight into unconventional methods of weight reduction and radar absorption. Historical context. It serves as a tangible link to Germany's late-war technological ambitions and the race to secure advanced prototypes at war's end. From a monetary standpoint, the V3 would command extraordinary value if ever offered at auction, not just as a collector's item, but as an artifact of aviation history. Its true value, however, lies in research and education, influencing aerospace engineering, military history, and museum studies alike. The mystery of the missing units. Despite decades of investigation, some Ho 229 units or parts remain unaccounted for. Rumors persist among aviation historians and war relic enthusiasts. Hidden airframes. Some speculate that partially constructed prototypes were buried or hidden in forested test areas to avoid capture by Allied forces. Black site experiments. Other fragments may have been transferred to classified facilities for further study, their existence still unacknowledged in official archives. Private collections. A few rare parts may remain in the possession of collectors who acquired them quietly in the immediate post-war years. Efforts to track these ghost units have produced tantalizing hints but no confirmed discoveries. Occasional claims of Ho 229 fragments turning up in European forests or old air bases add to the legend, though verification is rare. The mystery itself is part of the aircraft's allure. The Ho 229 is not just a historical artifact, it is a symbol of lost potential, of ideas that might have reshaped aviation sooner had circumstances allowed. Each fragment or rumor reminds us that history is rarely complete. Some pieces remain hidden, waiting to be rediscovered. Survivors as witnesses. In the end, the remaining Ho 229s are more than objects. They are witnesses to a transformative era, witnesses to a desperate technological race at the end of the Second World War, witnesses to human ambition, ingenuity, and the perils of pushing boundaries under extreme conditions. Witnesses to the fleeting nature of innovation when the tides of war and politics sweep through history. Visitors to museums can see the V3 and imagine its intended flight, feel the sleek, tailless contours, and understand why it captured imaginations both in 1945 and today. Its silence carries stories of innovation, ambition, and loss echoes that survive even as the aircraft itself remains grounded. A final reflection on survival. The Ho 229, in its limited physical form today, reminds us of the fragility of experimental technology. Prototypes can vanish overnight. Designs can be lost to fire, scrap, or secrecy. Yet, when even a single survivor remains, it carries immense historical weight. The few remnants that endure today, the V3 airframe, scattered fragments, and archival documentation, represent more than an aircraft. They are proof that radical ideas do not die easily. They may lie dormant, obscured, or forgotten, but when rediscovered, they teach lessons about the past, the evolution of technology, and the ever-present link between ambition and history. The Horten Ho 229's remaining units stand as silent reminders of a plane that arrived too late for war, but early for the future. Their scarcity makes them treasures of both engineering and memory, bridges connecting us to an era where the line between innovation and imagination was as thin as a flying wing slicing through the air. Conclusion. War machines are tools of destruction. They are built to intimidate, to dominate, and to extinguish lives in pursuit of political objectives. Yet, as we have traced the story of the Horten Ho 229, the flying wing that inspired stealth technology, it becomes clear that the legacy of a weapon does not end with the cessation of hostilities. The Ho 229 demonstrates that history is measured not only by battles fought or bombs dropped, but by what remains afterward. The ideas, the fragments, the memories, and the echoes of ambition long after the engines have fallen silent. The Ho 229 as a symbol of innovation and lost potential. From the earliest sketches of Walter and Reimar Horten to the incomplete V3 prototype captured by the Allies, the Ho 229 represents the apex of desperate innovation in the dying days of the Third Reich. Its design was audacious, even reckless, a tailless flying wing jet-powered, constructed from unconventional materials, and optimized for speed and efficiency in a time when traditional designs dominated. Yet the aircraft's true brilliance was paradoxical. It never fought. It never bombed a city. Its engines barely roared before the war ended. And yet, It achieved something few weapons ever do. It captured imaginations and influenced the future. By defying conventional design principles, it forced engineers and strategists in the post-war world to rethink assumptions about aerodynamics, materials, and the very nature of combat aviation. The Ho 229 story is thus not one of destruction but of possibility. It reminds us that technological potential often outlives its intended purpose, especially in the crucible of war. The journey from prototype to influence. The path of the Ho 229 after 1945 illustrates the complex life cycle of advanced technology in wartime and post-war contexts. Unlike mass-produced fighters or bombers, it existed in tiny numbers: a glider prototype, a jet prototype, and a pre-production V3. Each faced a different fate, destruction, crash, capture, but collectively they served as a bridge between World War II and the technological race of the Cold War. Captured by the United States, studied meticulously and stored away for decades, the Ho 229 became more than a relic. It became a blueprint of ideas. Its flying wing configuration influenced Northrop's post-war projects, including the YB-49 bomber and, indirectly, the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber. Even the Soviets, though never in possession of an intact prototype, absorbed lessons from German research that shaped their experimental aircraft programs. The aircraft's influence was subtle, almost ghostly but profound. Its very existence forced the Allies to ask uncomfortable questions. How far had German innovation advanced? What could the future of air warfare look like? How could the post-war world harness or prevent the replication of such designs? The Ho 229, in short, shaped thought as much as technology. Cultural and psychological legacy. The Ho 229's significance extends beyond engineering and strategy. It left a mark on culture, imagination, and memory. In aviation circles, it became a legend, a symbol of how innovation can emerge in extremis, even under a collapsing regime. Engineers revered it, historians documented it, and collectors and enthusiasts chased its fragments. In this way, the Ho 229 became a cultural artifact, bridging technical achievement and historical storytelling. Psychologically, it haunted both those who had worked on it and those who encountered its legacy. To Allied engineers, it represented what could have been a game-changer in the skies of Europe. To post-war Germany, it became a symbol of lost ambition, a reminder of technological heights pursued in the shadow of destruction and moral collapse. In books, documentaries, and modern media, the aircraft continues to fascinate, often depicted as a precursor to stealth aircraft, a testament to foresight that exceeded the era in which it was conceived. Its presence in museums, most notably the Smithsonian National Air and Space Museum, allows visitors to witness its form and imagine its unrealized potential. Even in a static, unrestored state, the Ho 229 communicates lessons about design, risk, and the fragility of innovation under duress. Lessons about the nature of technology and history. The Ho 229 also teaches broader lessons about technology and history. It demonstrates that innovation is not linear. The flying wing was conceived decades before modern stealth technology, yet the basic principles still resonate. Ideas can leap forward, waiting for the right circumstances to mature. Survival depends on context. Even revolutionary designs may fail if the circumstances are unfavorable. War fatigue, resource shortages, or bureaucratic inertia can end a prototype before it ever achieves operational relevance. Knowledge outlives machines. While most Ho 229 airframes were destroyed or lost, the knowledge they embodied survived. Design concepts, materials, research, and aerodynamic principles migrated into post-war projects worldwide. History is preserved selectively. The Ho 229's partial survival in museums and archives shows how chance, politics, and priority influence which artifacts endure. Its rarity enhances its symbolic weight. Through these lessons, the Ho 229 becomes more than an aircraft. It becomes a mirror reflecting the interplay between ambition, circumstance, and human curiosity. Knightley's reflection on the Ho 229. As I walk through museum halls, examining the silent curvature of the V3's wing, I am struck by its duality. It is both a product of desperation and a beacon of foresight. Every line, every contour, every unfinished edge tells a story of engineers pushing against time and war, of a nation's collapsing dream, and of ideas that outlasted the conflict that produced them. To tell the story of the Ho 229 is to confront a paradox. It was a machine built for war, yet its true legacy is peaceful in effect. The lessons learned, the knowledge preserved, the inspiration passed down to future generations of engineers and designers. It teaches us about innovation, yes, but also about fragility, patience, and the unpredictable journey of ideas. The emotional weight of history. Weapons like the Ho 229 remind us that history is not only measured in victories or casualties, it is measured in what survives, in fragments, in rumors, in inspiration. Walking past the V3 in the museum, one feels a peculiar intimacy with a machine that never fought yet shaped decades of aviation thinking. Every surviving fragment carries weight. The V3 wing section preserved in a crate, control surfaces scattered in storage, partial blueprints tucked away in archives. These are not mere remnants, they are echoes of ambition. They tell a story that cannot be read in textbooks alone. They teach us that history is often fragmented, and that understanding it requires piecing together disparate evidence, connecting dots across time, and acknowledging the human effort embedded in every innovation. A call to continue. Exploring the story of the Ho 229 is far from over. Each researcher, historian, and enthusiast who studies it continues the journey begun decades ago in the factories of Gotha. There are lessons still to learn, fragments still to discover, and ideas still to translate into understanding. If you want to follow these echoes, there are countless paths to explore. Forgotten bunkers, lost prototypes, secret documents, and silent wings frozen in museums. Each step brings us closer, not just to the Ho 229, but to understanding the broader currents of history, technology, and human ambition. Final thoughts. The Horten Ho 229 arrived too late to shape the outcome of World War II. Its engines barely roared, its bombs were never dropped, and its wings never sliced through Allied formations. And yet, paradoxically, its legacy is enduring. Through influence on aerodynamics, the seeds of stealth technology, and the sheer audacity of its design, the Ho 229 reminds us that history is not solely defined by victories, but by ideas that survive, adapt, and echo long after the battle ends. As I reflect on its story, I realize why I share these histories with you. Every aircraft, every prototype, every relic carries a voice. Some speak of triumph, others of unrealized potential. Some whisper warnings, others inspire innovation. The Ho 229 does all of this and more. It reminds us that war leaves traces not only on the battlefield, but in the minds and hearts of those who survive it, and in the technological threads that weave through decades of human progress. Closing invitation. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the life and afterlife of the Horten Ho 229. Its story is a testament to the enduring power of human ingenuity, even in the darkest hours. But this is not the end. There are countless echoes of history waiting to be explored. Weapons lost to time, machines that never flew, ideas that reshaped the modern world in ways unseen. I invite you to continue this journey with me. Explore the forgotten bunkers, uncover the lost prototypes, and trace the silent bones of history. And tell me, what topic should we investigate next? Share your thoughts in the comments. There are endless stories waiting to be told, and together we can bring them back to life.